So, in a previous video, I said I could predict when My Hero Academia's final season would come out, all the way down to the actual date, as well as predicting how many episodes were going to be in that season. And I brought up a bold claim that I could also predict the episode titles for each one of those episodes. And I would dive more into potentially predicting the episode titles as a whole, but that can be its whole video on its own. So, that is what this video is going to be about. Me putting My Hero Academia knowledge to the test to predict each and every episode title for the final season of My Hero Academia. So, let's cut to the chase and really dive into what this video is going to be about. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga and I'm here to do my predictions for what I believe all 13 episodes of the final season of My Hero Academia titles are going to be. And there's some very interesting ways that I'm going to be using to predict the final titles of My Hero Academia, just looking at how there's a similar naming scheme from what we've seen with the previous seasons, to just throwing a dart against the wall to see where it may stick and what makes the most sense for the final season. And I want to dive into the video immediately, but before I do that, I want to ask you guys, if you'd like to see more content like this and you want to see more of this beautiful face, subscribe to my YouTube channel, Manga for more content like this. And with that, let's dive really right into what we're going to be talking about. So let's begin by predicting the titles for the next 13 episodes of My Hero Academia's final season. And to start off, I want to go over my method of predicting the titles of each of the episodes. And while with the previous video, there was definitive patterns as well as more concrete mathematical equations I could have used to predict the pattern for when the actual season will come out, as well as predicting how many episodes will be in that season, this video will be, well, a little bit more speculative. I'm going to be making a lot more guesses in this video, but it's going to be a lot more educated guesses than just me actually just throwing things out there and seeing what will stick. And I'll go into more detail in my thought processes on how I chose the final 13 episodes of My Hero Academia. And to start off, we need to talk about how the titles of the episodes for My Hero Academia are always going to be based off of manga chapters. And this has been something that has been consistent through all of the seasons of My Hero Academia. However, the issue is always going to be that we can only guess the titles based off what chapters are being used for each individual episode, and the episodes will always have a different chapter count from each other. While in the last video, I calculated that the final season will most likely compose of 13 episodes with a rate of 2.5 episodes or approximately 2 to 3 chapters per episode. I, however, did not go into detail on what composes each episode because each episode in the most recent season was composed of between 2 and 4 chapters, but typically take the beginnings of one chapters and either ends an episode with it, or it starts the next episode with the end pages of a previous chapter from the previous episode. For instance, in episode 21, we saw that the manga covered chapters 395 to 398 in its entirety. However, in the episode prior of season 7, in episode 20, that it covered chapter 390 but only the last page of 390, but then covered the entireties of chapters 391 to 394. But then, if you look at episode 19 of season 7, you can see that that episode covered chapter 385 but only pages 12 to 17. Then it covered chapters 386 and 387, but only pages 4 to 17 in chapter 387. Then covered the entire pages of 388 to 389, but in 390, it only covered the first 12 pages because the 13th page was in the next episode. So as you can see, it's a lot more complicated to predict the titles of the chapters based solely on the chapters that are going to be in each episode. So for me to get the most accurate title for each episode, I would still have to make an educated guess if certain criteria are not met. And now I'm going to go over the certain criteria that may or may not exist when it comes to choosing the titles of the episodes for the My Hero Academia seasons. And while I haven't looked through every single episode, I did take a brief look through all the episodes throughout the series. And there are certain criteria that are done to determine if the name of a chapter for an episode will be used. For starters, If a chapter is not used in its entirety for an episode, aka only certain pages are used for the chapter, and if that chapter is split up between multiple episodes, then most likely than not, that title can't or won't be used. However, this is something that you can only determine with hindsight. And this idea also applies to chapters that would bookend an episode, and those chapters are most likely ineligible of being used. And this is just as difficult of a criteria as the prior, because we don't know what chapter is going to be used to bookend an episode until the episode comes out. Even then, they still have used the final chapter in an episode for the title, as seen in episode 74, which is named Lemillion, even though it's the final chapter used in the episode. However, that title in that chapter was something that was very important to the character, so maybe that's also a criteria. Even if we can assume that the final chapter of an episode can also be the title of the episode, this criteria does not really apply if there's only 2 or 3 chapters used in an episode, like we've seen in most of season 1 to 3. And even then, there is really no consistent pattern to whether or not the episode with 2 chapters will take the name from the first chapter or the second one. And same can apply for episodes that have 3 chapters, which may typically take the title from the chapter in the middle, but it still could take from the first and the last chapter. Any one of those can still be eligible, and that's just frustrating. So if we assume that each episode in season 8 has only 2 episodes, then we are out of luck. Or are we? And while there are some criteria that can eliminate chapter names that could be titles of episodes, there are criteria that can make chapter titles more likely to be titles of episodes. And there are a few criteria that can apply to this. One way to know if a chapter title can be used for an episode title is if the title of the chapter is a hero/villain name, such as, once again, seen in episode 74 called Lemillion, episode 12 called All Might, and even episode 47 called All for One. If a chapter name is just a hero or villain's name, then it is likely that it can become an episode title. This, however, is not just limited to code names, but also to the character's government name, such as episode 41 titled Kota, episode 152 titled Together with Shoji, and even quirks can become the names of the episodes if they are the title of manga chapters, such as episode 65 titled Overhaul, and episode 49 titled One for All. And then there are also titles that pertain to a character's origins or even their rising, which are most likely to be the titles of the episodes, such as Izuku Midoriya, Origin, Tinko Shimura, Origins, and Yaoyorozu, Rising. Also, if it involves having multiple parts, such as episode 7, Deku vs. Kacchan, which is based off the manga chapters of Deku vs. Kacchan and Deku vs. Kacchan Part 2, Encounter, which is based off Encounter and Encounter Part 2, and the Hellish Todoroki family, which you guys already know about that, so I don't have to explain it. But these are just a few examples that can help narrow down what is eligible to be the title of an episode. But unfortunately, these criteria are also not the rule. There are episodes where these criteria clash, such as seen in episode 157 that has Shoto Todoroki Rising as one of the manga chapters, or to be a little bit more specific, season 7 episode 19, but unfortunately that is not the title of the episode. However, it is at the end of the episode and is broken into 2 episodes, so that made it ineligible to be the title of that episode. And with this idea, this kind of shows that there are some criteria that play stronger roles than others, and that what holds a little bit more weight is what can't be a title versus what can be. Then this leads into the only real guarantee of an episode title. If there is an English number fully shown, or if the entire chapter is in English. And it's obvious, because My Hero Academia is a Japanese manga, most of the titles are in the Japanese katakana or kanji, the 2 main Japanese written languages. However, because My Hero Academia is about superheroes and inspired by American comics to an extent, many of the manga titles use English words, such as in episode 56, Rush, episode 70, Go, and episode 157, Extra. Hori seems to be using a lot more English titles later on in the series, which makes them more guaranteed for titles of episodes. And Something else that I alluded to earlier is that what really determines whether or not a manga chapter will be the title of an episode is how much that title of that chapter has thematic relevance or importance to the series as well as the episode that it's going to be in. Which is why the episode title sometimes typically pulls from the second chapter if 3 chapters are used, or the third or fourth chapter in an episode with 4 to 5 chapters adapted into it. Because most likely than not, the middle of that chapter count will most likely be the major focus of that episode, because it's going to either come towards the beginning of the episode or towards the middle. And those are probably going to be the most important aspects of that episode. And with all of that information that I just threw at you, I think that I can accurately guess the title of each episode that is going to be in the final season of My Hero Academia. And I'll try to give my own explanation and thoughts, as well as listing the potential criteria that will make it so that it will be the title of the episodes. So, let's start off with episode 1, the recap. I'm joking, but most likely than not, episode 1 would be The Lunatic. And that is because in the chapter that is coming from, chapter 401, the title of the chapter is in full English. Episode 2, The End of an Era, and this is most likely going to be a title based off the thematic relevance of that title as well as the chapter, and how that ties into a previous title that we had, which was the bookend for Act 1. So it makes sense that this will most likely be a title in the final season of My Hero Academia. Episode 3, The Final Boss. Yeah, this is just a shot in the dark. I think that this is probably the chapter 405, would just fit most as being a middle chapter, and I think that's why it will probably be episode 3. Nothing really more to it than that. Episode 4, An Exceptional Child. This one is a little bit different because it's actually the start of All for One's flashback. And typically when it comes to flashbacks, they usually share the same title name, which would mean that this would most likely have been the actual title if it was a part 1 or a part 2. But also because it is a combination of All for One's backstory, I believe that it will most likely be the title of the chapter because it will be having the most influence, because that episode will most likely be the entirety of All for One's flashback, and it just makes sense for something that massive to have the title of the first chapter, which is the start of that. Episode 5, Quirk Explosion. Need I say more? It's the name of the quirk, especially a quirk associated with the #1 fan favorite character. So of course it's going to be a title of an episode. Episode 6, History's Maddest Hero. This was a little bit more of a toss-up, especially since it's based on chapter 412, where Deku just goes full throttle against Tomura Shigaraki. And I think that may be the reasoning why I would say, because this also feels like a middle chapter title, and that it happens at a very massive impact in the actual fight between the two. So it just makes sense for me for this episode to be an episode title. Episode 7, Overlay. Yeah, I have really no massive explanation for it. It just feels like this could just be the title of an episode, so I chose it. Episode 8, From Midoriya to Shimura. Now we're getting to more that have more valid understanding and explanation for why this will most likely be a title. Very specifically, there is some precedence for a title like this being in a previous episode, specifically the title From Ida to Deku, as well as this is just a very prominent and important and impactful moment for both Deku in his characterization in the story, as well as being the near conclusion of the battle between the two. So it just makes sense for this to be the title of an episode. Episode 9, We Are Here. It was between this and Design because they both have English spellings in their titles in the manga chapters. However, come on, We Are Here. It's the big moment from chapter 421 where all of the heroes appear in a big Avengers Assemble moment. Doesn't matter if it's at the beginning, middle, or end of the episode, that is going to be a title chapter, bet on it. Episode 10, Epilogue. I think that's just very straightforward. We end the previous episode with We Are Here, and then after that, the entire fight ends, and then we go into the epilogue. Straightforward, to the point, it just makes sense for a title of an episode. Episode 11, The Hellish Todoroki Family Finale. Do I really have to explain it? It's a Todoroki themed chapter. It's a part of the final chapter for the ending of the Todoroki family plotline. Of course it's going to be a title. Moving on. Episode 12, The Girl Who Loves Smiles. Thematic relevance to the importance of characterization. The conclusion of Uraraka's character development? Yeah, that just makes the most sense. It's thematic to the series, thematic to the characters, so of course that is going to be the title of this episode. If it's not this, then it's the next chapter, but that just doesn't make sense for what I think the final episode is going to be. So this is really more or less like me just taking a guess, but I think that it makes sense for the character of Uraraka, as well as tying into the themes and the meanings for the story of My Hero Academia. Finally, episode 13, My Hero Academia. That is the most straightforward and most predictable title of an episode you could ever get. You end the My Hero Academia manga with the title of the manga, end the My Hero Academia with the title of the anime. That's it. I'm done. I'm out. So these are my predictions for the final 13 episodes of My Hero Academia, and how these are all based off what I've seen from the previous naming conventions of the previous episodes throughout the series. And once again, if I am wrong, you can just laugh at me and leave a comment down below to say how wrong I am. But if I get them all correct, you know what you gotta do? Subscribe to my YouTube channel. But yeah, I really enjoyed making this video, and hopefully you enjoyed watching it. And if you want to see more content from me like this, subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit that notification bell to be notified for whenever I upload more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Ugh, gosh, I hope this ages well. Goodbye!